Yeah, and approval. So.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today with us. I'm Julie Hanal, Sales and Relationships Manager at PDG Media, and I'll be your host for this session. Today, we're diving into something that's on top of mind for everyone and that has fundamentally reshaping how coffee brands are thinking about getting discovered, and that is artificial intelligence. Search is no longer just Googling, and your customers and prospects are asking ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude to find brands like yours. That's exactly what we are going to discuss today, and you are in excellent hands with today's speakers. First, Russ Hindle, our Group COO at PDG Media, who has over 7 years experience in content and digital marketing. Alongside Russ, Tanya Gutierrez, our key account manager at PDG Media. Tanya has been on both sides of the table, building her own coffee brand, but also helping our customers today with digital systems that drive real measurable growth. Between the three of us, we're going to walk you through how AI is influencing purchasing decisions and the kind of metrics you need to follow. There will also be a live Q&A at the end, so get your questions ready. Let's dive in. Starting off with how AI is changing how people discover coffee brands. As we all know it, search is no longer just Google. Your customers are now asking ChatGPT and all sorts of AI tools how to find a brand like yours. Coffee shops, people are looking for coffee shops. Different coffee shops are also looking for equipment brands and so on. And this has become key to really know how to do it by utilizing AI the way we should. 73% of B2B buyers now use AI tools. And so it's essential as a new brand to understand how that works. If you're not showing up, as you know, you're invisible. So how do we change that?
Thanks, Julie. I'll take over from here. I think one of the big questions that a lot of people have is around, to begin with, we've established that LLMs are an incredibly crucial platform for modern discovery and consideration in the purchase funnel. And for marketers working in coffee, everyone knows they need to be using it and optimizing content for LLMs, but there's a real question about how you do that. Before you can actually put a strategy in place, though, you need to understand, at least at a base level, how LLMs surface information and how they decide to recommend information. So basically, an LLM, for those of you who don't know, stands for large language model, and what it does and what they are capable of at a base level, most people already know this, is passing and surfacing a huge amount of information incredibly quickly. So what that means that when you type a query into ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or Perplexity, whatever, it will cast a very wide net very quickly across the entire website for relevant search terms, scrape all of that back in fractions of seconds, and then use all of that to create a composite image of what your brand is about. And that affects both how you appear when someone searches about your brand specifically. So in our case, when someone searches for PDG Media, and also when somebody searches for a category and whether or not you appear in that category. So let's say digital marketing agencies for coffee. Your presence out there on the internet will influence whether or not you turn up. So that's kind of a base level understanding of it. The biggest difference between that and traditional search through Google, Bing, is that how you are searching and what you're searching for changes what you get. So in the past, if you were to search for basically anything, you would get an index of web pages through Google. You would click on those, you would read through them. Sometimes you might have embedded information about some of those pages, or you might get sponsored results. But up until 3 or 4 years ago, it was pretty much exclusively just an index of web pages. Now that's completely different. A query, for instance, around the best espresso machine for a high volume cafe is one of the examples we've used here. You may actually get embedded specs. You will get sources about and reviews that will be scraped immediately and be kind of guided to that intent. So by passing an understanding that you are a high volume cafe, or at least assuming it, an LLM will recommend the information that it believes is most relevant to you. So that intent shapes the response that you get, and the presumed intent of your query customizes and tailors much more so than a traditional search engine what you get back. Similarly, and it's probably easier to see now with agentic e-commerce, which basically might sound like a scary, heavily technical phrase, but means buying stuff in LLMs. If you search for something which is a consumer-led query, so the best espresso machine to buy someone as a Christmas gift, you'll get links to Amazon, you'll get links to distributors and retailers. So what that ultimately means is intent shapes results.
Ross, quick question here. Do you think then coffee brands need to think about intent a lot more than they need to think about how they want to position their brand on the market?
Well, both are important, but ultimately, yes. So, for instance, if you are, if you're an equipment manufacturer, let's say, and your target is predominantly B2B, so let's say a roaster manufacturer, you know that your buyers in their consideration phase will be mainly looking at technical specs. They'll be looking at power consumption. They'll be looking at compatibility with afterburners and software. So you need to make sure that that information about your products is readily available. If it's not, when LLMs go and look for it, they won't be able to find it. If they won't be able to find it, buyers or prospective buyers who are looking for this equipment won't get that information, and they may just as easily choose an alternative that does have that information readily available. So, previously a lot of that used to be gated, or it used to be hidden to an extent in pricing files that would only be given after a pre-sales meeting, and it would be kind of protected. That's, with the exception maybe of pricing, that's no longer something that really benefits you, and I would say actively harms you when it comes to GEO and LLM search. You need to consider the intent that your customers will have, and we'll get into how you can do this moving forward. But a great way of doing that is basically going back through your sales process. Let's say you've got a prospect who has converted. Let's say if you are selling B2B coffee equipment like a coffee roasting machine, looking back at every single question you've had through that process, from discovery all the way through to conversion, and with the exception of sensitive information that's specific to that client, you need to make all of that information as public as possible. And some of that obviously will be very, very specialized. You won't be able to do it, but the better that you can effectively match that commercial intent, the better you will perform on LLMs. So making as much information, as much relevant information about your products and services readily available. I think the next thing really to consider is that, so where this information comes from is I just mentioned, how you make your resources as a brand available online, whether that's on your website or on your Instagram. But you also need to consider other sources. So LLMs don't just scrape from your website. They will scrape from trade publications such as Perfect Daily Grind and Coffee Intelligence. They all scrape from Reddit is a huge source, especially when you come to more consumer-led products. Not exclusively, but they I think are unfairly weighted. Evidence would suggest towards Reddit for consumer products, because the major base of Reddit users will be consumers. There are still B2B inquiries on there, but for the most part, if you're looking at home roasters and home espresso machines, Reddit is often where people go to understand a community. LLMs understand that, and therefore they know that those are the types of responses that people want, so that when you ask LLMs, they will cut out the middleman and go straight to Reddit. Then we've mentioned Reddit, your website, press coverage, but also reviews. So if it is suitable, having a trust pilot, very good. Having testimonials on your website is crucial, and building in the infrastructure for that. If you have case studies, that's a goldmine for LLMs. And the more information you can provide around that case study, the better. And when it comes to using all of these channels, making sure that all of them are consistent with how they describe you is really important, because that will influence how AI in turn describes you. If, for instance, you have one brand talking about, several sources talking about how your brand is a cafe equipment supplier, and several sources talking about how your brand is an espresso equipment supplier, that little difference will show up, and it will confuse an LLM if you are too inconsistent with that. So I think that actually answers the second part of your question, Judy, which is that it's crucial to make sure that you are consistent, accurate, and comprehensive with not just how you talk about your products, but also how you talk about your brand and how you position yourself. Which leads me to the next point. So we know now how LLMs surface information, but we need to move on to what that means, and subsequently what you can do to influence it. And one of the things that Google and traditional search engines were never capable of doing was synthesizing and collating information around tone. So you would put a load of queries in, and then for each of those searches, you would have to go and actually check web pages manually to understand whether or not a product review was positive or negative. You might be able to get it from the preview, but you have to do a lot of reading and a lot of legwork. LLMs are fantastic at reading, and they can do it a lot quicker than you. So what that means is that your preview now will not just take facts, it will also take tone and sentiment. And this is something that we refer to as brand sentiment. When we are talking about it in a both a B2B and a B2C context. And this functions similarly to traditional SEO in terms of first principles, but different in how information is surfaced, as I said. So if you have 100% of sources which are high authority talking about you in a very positive, trustworthy fashion, that is good. And AI will love to recommend you if those sources are high enough in volume or high enough in authority. For those of you who understand traditional SEO, this is where you do have parallels to things like Moz domain authority, which do absolutely still matter. It is not a case that because we are moving towards Reddit and moving towards information on your website that we are moving away from industry press and sources. It still matters a lot. It's just that it's weighted alongside all of these other channels. So having plenty of good high authority sources which speak about you in a positive light, great. As I said, Trustpilot, trade media, and communities like Reddit and forums, all very good for this. If the sentiment around you is negative, that counts against you. And rather than Google just showing all of these results, AI, and that includes Google's AI overview now, can parse not just what is being said about you, but how it's being said. So you need to consider that as many as half of all consumers from a B2C perspective and buyers, this stat actually covers both of them, summarize reviews before making a purchase decision specifically with AI. So review content is crucial and arguably more important to a degree. because it will be brought before consumers with one less click. Sorry, Judy, have you got a...
Yes, I had a quick question. You mentioned that press PR, like publishing a piece on Perfect Daily Grind, for example, would help. What would be the ratio of publishing on a platform like Perfect Daily Grind versus caring about Reddit when you are trying to change, and improve what's been said about you?
Well, like any marketing strategy, whether it's B2B or B2C, being really good and over-optimizing on one channel isn't enough. You need to do everything, and you need to do everything reasonably well. And it will compound and snowball the more that you do it. So let's say that you have a rigorous content strategy where you are putting out a blog every single day on your channels, and that you are constantly publishing, like I said earlier, product specs and FAQ content and stuff which really satisfies LLMs for a fact-finding and technical perspective. If you are the only source coming out with all of that information, it doesn't really matter. You will still be able to get some of the way there, but you will need citations and sources from other media in order to help you. So I would actually argue that it is crucial. You need some form of supporting strategy with other press channels and platforms. That, again, if you can do all of it, fantastic. If you can only do one, I would suggest that you look at some form of trade media, and specifically written trade media will, because LLMs are language models, will influence that positively. But the idea is, and this is the same with any comprehensive marketing strategy, is that you need to be pretty good at everything and doing a little bit of everything. So it's by no means the only thing to do, but it is certainly valuable. And the higher authority the source, the better. If you were to be in the UK mentioned by the BBC or major newspapers, those tier 1 high authority sources, as long as they are not exclusively advertorial and there is some native value to them, in the similar way that we do with sponsored articles on Perfect Daily Grind, then that's great. AI is getting smart enough to be able to tell when content on flagged as advertorial, very clearly as sponsored, is weighted in a different way, basically, is what algorithms would suggest. That's still a bit of a gray area, but yeah, all of that is to say that ultimately you need to do a bit of everything, and high authority press and industry media sources massively support that. Talking about how else you show up, though, in terms of GEO, which is a phrase or an acronym, sorry, that you will hear a lot if you're looking into the future of search and digital marketing. It means generative engine optimization. People also talk about AIO or AEO, answer engine optimization. The first principles are basically similar to SEO, which is that you need to have good content. You need to have a strong technical digital presence, i.e. your website needs to be crawlable and it needs to be fast, because if it isn't fast, AI will go and look somewhere else. And you need to have citations externally. All three of those things still matter. But while they are still the cornerstones of a good strategy, they do need to be adjusted. You need a course correction from traditional SEO, which I believe leads us to the 4 areas that Tanya's going to go through. So Tanya, I'll leave you to start with the first one.
Yes, thank you, Ross. And yeah, like you said, and I think something that we see often is that when we talk about AI visibility, it's about, okay, let's create more content, add more case studies, or let's start publishing around the Reddit and different forums. However, if you only look at that, you're missing a fundamental piece in terms of how actually AI is going to find you, and especially in generative engine optimization, it is actually going to recommend you and mention you in every search. And that's how you present information towards any buyer on your website, any part where you are distributing content. That will be crucial, because if you are not correctly presenting and organizing your information in the way AI can actually scan it find it, summarize it, and then recommend it to whoever is searching, you, as it was mentioned at the very beginning, you are essentially invisible. So to start in how you can structure your content for AI, if we think about your website right now, do you have clear headers? Do you have not only the clear headers, but within them, like clear categories about what your content is and where are we going to be able to find, for example, as shown on this image, information about product packaging? Like, it's clear to me that this is an education center, but even within that education center, I've been clearly guided about all the different topics that this brand can offer me. So it's not only for your buyer, that they can benefit with this type of organization, but it's at the same time very important for AI because it's clearly identifying what exactly it's your brand about, your product, your services. And as it was shared before, it's a consistency of, okay, your brand will talk about all these different topics, like you're creating authority in all these different topics and categories. So as much as you can to have all these clear headers, a proper structure in terms of categories, that will benefit in terms of if you're showing up on all the search terms that you will need for your brand. Another important piece here is the chunkability, and this is also connected in terms of having clear categories. But again, if we're talking about creating specific pieces of information within your website or wherever you are posting content, you also need to think about providing the relevant information. Again, it's not about just creating more, but the quality of the information. And most importantly, when we talk about chunkability, it's you need to give the answer right away, because I'm sure you have seen across other websites, or as, let's say, the traditional copy on websites was having these type of intros at every paragraph and then adding product specifications or talking about the benefits. But if you don't give the answer right away, like in the first 2 sentences, it's going to be difficult for AI to really understand, okay, are you actually relevant? Like, it's going to pick someone else, because what AI is looking for is, okay, this person is searching for best espresso machines for my coffee shop. If there's someone that is giving the right answer or even a comparison table, it's going to pull that and show it at the very top. But if you're not, let's say, sharing that and just simply briefly, talking about certain best espresso machines, the likelihood of you showing up in those searches, it's minimum at this point. So this is something for you to consider. Now, another crucial part, and I think this is something that it's going to be exercised moving forward, it's you need to start not only thinking, but speaking as your customer and really understand what type of questions they are making, what type of conversations they're having around your products, services, your brand, or the industry itself, or the category in which your brand and product exist. So you can then place that on all of your content. As you can see here, you have the wording more of like question, phrases, things like that tend to be more in a usual conversation if someone arrives at a certain place or if someone reaches out to you, rather than just saying pricing, product benefits. So this is the shift that needs to happen in order for AI to really pick up your content and all the information. Because if you just leave it, let's say, quite general, again, you are not going to be ranking. So this is another, let's say, mindset that you need to have. You are thinking about how to rank within those searches. So first get you mentioned, but then you want at least to be on the first options. Otherwise, people is not going to move forward or decide to go to the option 5 if ChatGPT recommended at least 10. Like, they're going to focus on the first 3. That's the reality. And another part here, and this is, let's say, a bit technical, but it's going to be quite simple. When I say it's very important to think about how you present information, it's not only on the, let's say, front end or what your buyer can see, but also think about the back end, the inside, because this is actually the first layer that AI will scan. Like, AI is actually, searching for tokens of data. So you need to tell AI what your content is about on the back end. So this is what we are talking about when we say schema markup. For AI, it's important to understand if your paragraph or your content is related to product, so it can properly summarize it, filter it, and then recommend it to whoever is searching about your product specifications. So this is when we say, yes, you need to have a schema markup, but it needs to be specific. And then the last point here, it's about user-generated content. We have already mentioned about making sure you have testimonials or reviews. So don't expect this just to be having, beautiful reels on Instagram and TikTok and things like that. You need to go beyond that and really utilize all of our testimonials, reviews, and position them on your website, like making sure this is part of the narrative when I'm browsing, when I'm searching through ChatGPT, talking to Claude, because otherwise it's going to be creating a lack of trustworthy in terms of, yes, you're saying you're an expert, but I don't see anyone actually referencing to your expertise. So this is crucial nowadays when we're talking about AI actually mentioning you.
One of the things I would just add there, Tanya, to piggyback off of that, is that with this kind of community first focus for LLMs, whether that's reviews, Reddit, forums, it is genuinely worth encouraging that however you can from a brand's perspective. So if you're a D2C brand, giving people 20% off a purchase if they can prove that they've left you a review, could be worth its weight in gold if you manage to stack up 25, 50, 100 of those, because those will be at volume and at scale passed by LLMs. The second thing that I would add, and this is just about this structure point in general, all of which are fantastic points, Tanya. Firstly, this assumes that you are producing regular content, and you can do all of this, and you can have a piece which is perfectly curated to all of these specifications. Doesn't matter if you're only doing one article every 3 months. You need to be putting out good, informative content to capture traffic, really week in, week out. We will talk about volumes a little bit down the line, and target volumes there, but that on its own is really important. The second thing, this is not just true for blog content, whether that's a knowledge center, a publication, articles, or this is not just for that. It's also for your homepage. It's for your product pages and any content that you as a brand are authoring about your brand or products. So keep that in mind. You may think, oh, well, I don't, I'm not investing in a blog, which is a mistake. But if you're not, that you don't need to do this just for your other pages. You absolutely do. And it should be for all of the content that you put together. These are best practices, and these are best practices specifically for AI. Anyway, Tanya, I'll move on to the next slide, and I'll let you get started there.
Yes, thank you, Ross. And continuing to, and I think it deserves their entire slide because it's that important. It's, again, like, try to make it as conversational as possible. So if you really need to start figuring out what are the type of questions, all the conversations, terms that your buyer will use when they refer to your brand, product, service, industry, and so on. And this is something that as well you need to consider in terms of they are now talking to ChatGPT, to Claude. Like, it's not just written language, it's spoken language. So imagine all the information they're getting, all the questions they're making. And if we reference to the very first slide, this is why the search and the traffic from this channel converts faster at a much higher rate, because they are prepared. Like, they will have all the information at hand and all the brands recommended at hand. So it's that important for you to really, as we have been mentioning before, to think about all the content that you have out there and how to structure it, how to start creating that recurring or rhythm of content for you to belong in those type of conversations. So the first exercise I will say or recommend you to do is like really sit down and debrief on all the type of questions your buyer it's making, but then go a bit deeper, let's say, and really identify, are you talking to let's say your general audience, or are you actually tailoring each buyer persona? Because as we have also discussed it before, it's very different if someone is a cafe owner, a home brewer, a coffee enthusiast. They will use their own terms, like they will have different ways of communicating. So if that is important for your brand, and I would say it is, because at the end you're, let's say, missing out on that traffic if your competitor is actually tailoring or approaching that type of buyer. So you need to really figure out your buyer personas, and then for each of them, identify those type of conversations, the type of search terms, and all the queries they're having when they talk to ChatGPT or any other LMS. And as I said here, just to summarize, it's very important that you use all the search terms, and you can also translate it into your content. So it's a win-win situations, because you are providing relevant information to your buyer, but at the same time, it's supporting you to create more content, to distribute more ideas in terms of how you position your brand across your industry. If we can, thank you, Russ. And now this term, I know it might seem technical, but it's actually very simple in the sense that, let's think about AI quick checklists when they are reviewing your content. So here they are focusing on, okay, whether your content is showing that it has experience, whether your content is showing that it has expertise, and whether your content and your brand is actually has assertiveness, and then lastly, trustworthiness. And to start with experience, this is something that AI will identify if your brand, let's say, has activity in the market, like actually proving, like if you talk about, yes, we have worked with X number of coffee farmers for the past 10 years. We have been in different, championships, or we have, developed this. This is the type of information that AI is picking up and saying, yes, this brand has experience, that it needs to be positioned in this type of search. But then when we talk about expertise, here it's basically where you're showing AI your credentials. So saying we have been certified by X institutions, or we have earned or won Cup of Excellence in 2025. All of this is tidying up your content and creating a level of authority. So you are, let's say, building up or growing in terms of the ranking when AI is scanning for information. So if you're checking those boxes, then you will have a better score for AI when it comes to which brand do I select for this search term. So I hope the difference between experience and expertise it's clear. If not, feel free to ask. But then the third one, which is assertiveness, this is another one that we see that tends to be missed, because again, and I think to your question, Julie, most of the brands, they will focus on investing on their own, let's say, ecosystem, like their own channels. But AI will scan you and then go outside, it will start looking like who is actually mentioning this product from your brand. Like, is it actually something that go to source as you express on your website, or is it not? Or does it have any negative reviews? Again, it's going to start scanning the whole environment, the whole network. So if you don't have, or you lack this type of mentions, citations in different trade press, forums, communities, the likelihood, again, of your brand to be positioned or ranking higher, it's going to be hard. So please think about this, not just about PR, like this is actually something that now in AI search, it's quite connected to being shown, like being part of the conversation, and potentially have a sell through the search with ChatGPT, Claude, and so on. So this is how important. Yes, sorry, Jolie, go ahead.
No, sorry, I had a question, because I think, that model makes it really easy to create, valuable content. But I'm thinking of all the new brands out there, the coffee brands that maybe don't have experience, expertise, and authority, and they really want to push through and still rank. What would you suggest? Like, What should they focus on to get there?
Yes, yeah, that's a very good point. I think here for assertiveness, and this is also how you can connect it with the expertise, because when we talk about expertise, it's not only about your brand. So think about how can you collaborate with someone that is an industry expert, because that industry expert will have certain authority within their environment. So it's creating this network for your brand to start again positioning as an authority in that media. So yes, you perhaps don't go straight into the trade press, but how can you, let's say, then start having those conversations from a trustworthy and authoritative person or site? I'm not sure if that answered your question or you have a follow-up question.
Well, one of the things that I would also just add is that this is also why brand ambassadors are really valuable. So customer testimonials are a huge part of this, especially for B2B brands. But yeah, like if you are new, a lot of the time, and this is also for network and for wider marketing, but with GEO now, those brand ambassadors will also pay off their investment. So you can use them as high quality interviews in pieces. Let's say that you're a new espresso machine brand working with a WBC champion. You can use them to attach some legitimacy to your brand, but also if you are a roaster, even just featuring customers, wholesale customers who have a particularly cool, well-renowned coffee shop with a strong audience, as long as they're providing genuinely unique content. And by content, that can be interviews, that can be written or video. It can be that they might do an AMA on Reddit and speak about their work with your brand. The specific type of content doesn't matter as much as long as it is passable by AI. But yeah, that's a good route to market for newer brands to start getting a little bit of prevalence, along with features in trade media as well.
Yes. And then for the final point in terms of trustworthiness, it's basically connecting everything. Like at the end, every content or wherever your brand is mentioned, you want to make sure that it's as much as possible organic content, but also that it's providing content of quality, that it's relevant. Avoid as much as possible any vague or general. Like at the end, you are aiming for that authority, that level, and you want your brand to be seen as that. So make sure that whatever it's out there, it's truly benefiting not only you, but at the same time, whoever it's your buyer or your audience. And then I think, Ross, you're going to take over. Oh, yeah, sorry, we were missing this 4th point. And I think, again, connecting into the questions about going outside your brand ecosystem, it is that important to have that wider presence. Like it's not just, as I said, because it's something that we see that people feel like, do I need to invest in this type of things? You do. And as we were just talking, it doesn't mean you need to splurge. Like you can be creative and start, okay, I will collaborate for this type for these 3 months with a brand ambassador and have a series of conversations about this type of, let's say, expertise that my customer right now is asking and that I need to cover that gap because there's no content out there, or I want to be ranking in that search query. So then you can move on to, okay, we have tested the brand ambassador, now let's try the trade press. And that it's already leaving marks across your online presence for AI to pick up and say, okay, you've collaborated with a world champion barista. That's excellent. I will share that. Like that's again creating a good score for AI in order to be positioned. So really use this as part of your strategy. Like I will say it's not an option, like it should be part of your strategy, because this is what actually AI will also revisit as soon as it checks the rest of the boxes in terms of experience, expertise. But if you don't have that authoritiveness, then competitor or brand B will be the first option rather than yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Tanya. It's all very insightful, and I think a lot about the different channels that you should use and avenues. I'm conscious of time, but I did want to look at 2 case studies for what this looks like in practice, and what you can expect if you put into place a consistent, high-quality strategy for ranking on LLMs such as ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude. The first of these is a long-running client of ours, MTPAC, where since late 2020, we have published 5 articles a week on their education center, which is designed to be a high-authority resource for roasters with good, high-quality imagery and completely unique interview content. So the way that we structure that content changed massively in probably early 2024, when the first principles of GEO kind of became emergent and something that you could really legislate for. It was a bit of a Wild West before that. But you will see that in every article, and you can go and check, we have key takeaways at the beginning. So breaking down for an LLM exactly what it can expect to find in the article. So signposting that, clear headings. So using H1, H2, H3 tags in hierarchy, not messing those up. FAQs at the end, alt text on every image. Again, some of this is still SEO best practices, but it's just more about how you actually present the content with those best practices. So the takeaways and the FAQs are a big part of that. The one added thing that I would point out is that there used to be a traditional approach for SEO, and you see this quite a lot with recipes, where if you're looking for a recipe online, about 10 years ago, it went from being easy to find the ingredients list to really hard, because you have to scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll. And there will be a lot of content designed to really pad it out so that it ranked, and then that gauntlet of scrolling would take you past ads. So there's obviously a commercial benefit there as well. But where SEO prioritized good, high authority content with relevant keywords, even if those keywords and the actual value of the article was positioned towards the end to increase engagement time, AI wants the opposite. So if you are putting together a recipe that you want to be indexed by LLMs, you want your ingredients list, your method at the top. You can have the story about how it's your grandma's recipe and that it's been in your family for generations near the end. Context second, answer first. That is one of the biggest differences. And yes, as I mentioned, and as Tanya mentioned, we use a new interview for every single article to provide unique one-of-a-kind quotes. And these are sometimes from customers, they're sometimes from brand designers who work with these roasters, sometimes from industry experts from across the packaging and design space more widely. And as a result of doing this over the last 6.5 years, we now dominate B2B coffee packaging keywords with MTPAC across the board. They are consistently ranked in LLM queries that are relevant. So if you search custom coffee packaging, usually no matter where you are in the world, although it will vary for everyone, MTPAC will emerge as a supplier. And this generates commercially, because this is what we are all here for, hundreds of inbound leads every single month. I'll give you another example, which is FlowSmart, an equipment manufacturer, an Australian business for iced coffee and matcha taps. And while the content that we produce for them and with them is much lower, it's much focused around more specific terms, because when you compare it to something like packaging, equipment has a much higher value and a much smaller base of prospective customers. So that's why we focus our content around very specific use cases. So mobile carts and dispensing for events, drive-through coffee in particular. So while it is more niche, you may be thinking, okay, well, I don't have hundreds of prospective customers at my business. How do I put together 5 articles a week that will say something different? Maybe you don't do that kind of volume. Can you still produce unique content around certain use cases? Absolutely. This is how you do it. And the articles also double as case studies. So what that means is that if you do have a customer, it brings value to them, because it gets more people looking at their content. But best practices and the strategies are largely the same. And as a result, for FlowSmart, we generally show up And again, ranking depends massively from person to person, your history, your context, your location. But for specific inquiries around iced coffee on tap and similar key phrases, we rank, and this generates qualified leads who already understand what the product does, while also, as I mentioned, giving some secondary exposure to customers as case studies. Now, you may be thinking, well, that's a whole lot of information. Where do I start? So we have broken this down into 5 key points to begin. If you are not doing anything for GEO, anything for content, you may be panicking, but there's no need to panic. We have everything here, and this is where you should start. So the first thing you need to do is audit your website. If you haven't done this already, you need to consider how people move through the website. What information do you want to present to people? If you are a B2B brand, the target action is for them to, generally speaking, inquire, or for you to somehow capture their leads. Maybe that's an ROI calculator. Maybe that is a configurator for some kind of product. Nevertheless, conversion action is what you need to consider. And for B2B brands, it's some form of inquiry. Maybe it's qualified, maybe it's not. For B2C brands, however, that conversion is generally a digital purchase through e-commerce. So you need to understand where you want to drive people. And then once you know that, you can accordingly position your content. So, for instance, as Tanya was talking about schema, you know that you want people to go to your product pages to learn more about the products. You should use product schema for that. Are you doing an interview with a customer? That should probably be person schema, because you want to really show off that customer to people, especially as we were saying, if that is a cool barista or a customer that you want to lavish with praise and exposure. So consider the structure, consider whether or not it fits, all of your website content fits the criteria that we set out, that Tanya set out in the previous 4 slides. Point number 2, in view of that, is the information positioned correctly? Go through every page. Is the most relevant information at the top? If it isn't, you need to change that. Whether that's for your products, whether that's your homepage, whether that's in blog content, case studies, whatever, don't put it at the bottom. If you want people to see it, if you want LLMs to see it, put it at the top. The most important thing should be at the top. Thirdly, are you doing anything other than your product pages and your homepage? Do you have a blog or knowledge center? If not, you need to, because constantly producing new content doesn't just give you an opportunity to feature clients and prospects. It also shows LLMs that you are alive, that your brand is constantly adding something new to the internet, something new and valuable, and make sure that it follows all the best practices we previously mentioned. And that leads us into the next point. Make sure it contains first-hand interviews. If you can get video content, even better. But rather than just repurposing facts that you can find elsewhere on the internet, you need to add something new and add something valuable. Tanya mentioned earlier a comparison table. LLMs love comparison tables. Use that. Maybe it's something to do with specs around your machine. Put that in there. Make sure that this content is genuinely new and valuable. And then finally, you've started doing all of this. If you don't know how you're performing, you don't know how to adjust your strategy. So you need to make sure that you are using tools to measure your presence on LLMs, which leads us to Tanya's final point on what to track and what those 4 metrics mean. Sorry, Tanya, I will pass over to you.
Yes. So in terms, again, yes, we know this is a lot of information, but in terms of measuring your progress, first thing, it's really understanding whether your brand is actually been mentioned. Like, you can easily start looking for or testing certain search terms and really identifying, okay, am I actually showing up or not? That's going to be like the first indicator. Like, if certain competitors are showing up, okay, why and what exactly they are showing up, like what type of content. So that's another part that you can really consistently review, as we were just talking about all the case studies. So empty pack, it's consistently showing up under those terms. Like, those will be your target terms. Okay, I want to read those every month, every week, to make sure I am putting out there the content that it's needed, that it's relevant and it's high quality, so I can remain at the top. So that's going to be the first metric. Then in terms of your element visibility score, as we said, like it's very important for you to understand if you're being, distributed, because if you just stick to one platform, you again need to understand how people use differently each type of LMS, like, so this is something that will actually tell you if you've been mentioned across multiple sources. If not, then you're also missing out on a lot of traffic and potential buyers. So it's very important you also have that balance between, okay, I've ranked at this one, but then the rest are falling flat or not at all. So this is another indicator for you that your strategy is not only serving to just one LMS, but you're trying to distribute as much as possible and ranking in the majority of them. Then the third one will be AI-driven traffic. So this is very important because I think when we talk about AI visibility, and as we said, like this is traffic that it's converting faster at a much higher rate because all the information that they're gaining. So you also need to track that on your site, like how it's been referenced back to your site. So as we said, like if you are trying to position all your product specifications, requirements, or product benefits, then how can you track back all the traffic that you're gaining from all the different elements? And this is something that you can do through Google A4. Like you have already those, let's say, referrals as channels to make sure you can identify whether it's actually helping you on your website, on your conversion, and identifying that it's bringing you actual sales. So this will be a really high indicator for you to have, and it's important that you set it up so you really understand what's working and what's not, and that everything it's tied up together. Like we said, like it's not just about, for example, publishing in a certain trade press, but then you can also trace back whether that is actually giving you good traffic through those mentions through AI search, and then link it to an actual sale. Like you can do that. So this will be the third point. And then the fourth one, as we talk about the brand sentiment, share of voice, at the end, you want your brand as you imagine it to be positioned. So you need to take care of how it's actually, been mentioned, and the conversations around your brand and the consistency. So if it's not matching what you set up for your brand to be, then you need to start working on how to build that share of voice, making sure that you are showing up in the search terms that are matching your brand, matching your customers' inquiries, and making sure that it's a positive, and at the end you want that to be expanded and have a high share of voice. So I would say those are the four main indicators to have consistently if you are, let's say, having a monthly strategy for AI visibility.
I would also add here, Tanya, and I know I'm going to talk about the tools in a bit more detail, but share of voice specifically, you want to understand your share of voice in relation to your competitors. So as part of all of this, you will need to, of course, identify who your competitors are and how you rank against them. Tools for doing this. So for AI citations, LLM visibility score, and share of voice, so 1, 2, and 4, AccuLLM and SEMrush AI are both quite good for those. Brandlight is more comprehensive and considerably more expensive, but AccuLLM and SEMrush AI are very good places to start. I will note that current recommendations for AI, AIO, AEO, and GEO measurement tools are only going to be relevant for a few months because there are so many new tools and platforms emerging, so many new metrics emerging. So the most important thing is that you keep refreshing that. The final point here is to use Google Analytics. It still works, and especially for point 3, you can now identify through GA4, that is Google Analytics 4, how much of your traffic is coming from LLMs. And what you have to understand is that that traffic may look like a minuscule percentage, but if it's made its way through to your website, consider that it has already done a lot of the consideration in the LLM itself. So that traffic that comes to you from an LLM is so much more likely to convert. So we're going to take some questions now, probably for 10 minutes or so. I'm going to bring them up, but please do ask some questions in the chat. The first one that I'm going to bring up from Maria Vasquez is about whether or not AI optimization is a one-time thing or a weekly or monthly task that you need to consistently manage and monitor. It is not one time. So everything we have said here is around a consistent strategy, and doing it quietly, consistently, day in, day out will yield much, much better results than just a one-off fantastic piece of content. You need to do this routinely. You need to measure month to month and quarter to quarter. And I think most importantly, you have to understand that if you are starting from nothing, it will take time to build up momentum. Generally, we see that from brands that don't have any kind of presence or content strategy around GEO, it takes a minimum of 10 to 12 weeks before you start to see the green shoots of success. So that I think is something else to.
Yeah. And to add to that point, yeah, definitely like you need to have a consistent monitoring, and some of the tools actually have alerts. So if you, let's say, drop in a certain score or mention, it's gonna let you know. So you can then rapidly assess it. But I'll say like going back to the case studies, make sure you identify again where are the search terms, and also going back to tracking with Google, which are the ones that are actually providing you sales, and bringing revenue. Like those are the ones that you want to maintain as much as possible. So this is for you to have a proper strategy, and don't try to go in every search term here and there, because thinking about, let's say, smaller teams, and if you're a new brand, try to at least win on those search terms, and then you move to the next ones.
Perfect. Yeah, that's exactly right, Tanya. It's about executing as you go, and moving from one key area for traffic to another. So next up, we have a question about how to track sentiment and not just mentions when we are monitoring how Gen AI tools represent the brand. This is really important. We have spoken about brand sentiment a lot. Basically, the best place to check is by the best place to look. It will be at a specific AI visibility tool. SEMrush AI, for instance, has a section on it as a dashboard for brand sentiment. In terms of tracking it, generally speaking, it will give you, a percentage of your citations which are positive, a percentage of citations which are negative, a percentage of citations which are somewhere in the middle, and you have to kind of make of that what you will. What it will do, though, SEMrush AI in particular, is it'll show you areas where it thinks you can improve on those negative sentiments about the brand. So, for instance, for a roaster manufacturer, it may say, okay, fine, so you've got positive sentiment regarding all these points around efficiency, compatibility with external software, batch size, temperature control, and all of those things are positive. But it will tell you, okay, people have complained that there's not enough information or poor information around your emissions. So that's a gap that you need to fill. So not only will it tell you where you are looking good, it will tell you where you're looking bad and how to address it. So I think using those tools in particular is a good place to start. We have one more here, and this is about how to check and monitor specifically how ChatGPT talks about your brand. And that, I would say, basically everything we said in the previous slide. So around using a specific AI visibility tool plus something around something around GA4 as well, or kind of a traffic monitoring and looking at traffic from individual sources. So you want to understand the percentage of your traffic that is coming from LLMs and make sure that that is proportionally increasing. And then at the same time, you want to make sure what LLMs are saying about you is good through a tool like AccuLLM or a tool like SEMrush AI. Okay. So I think that will be our last question for today. We're getting to the end of our time slot for 1 hour. I'm going to just tie up with this final slide. We're going to send this PDF out to everybody afterwards. It's a pet peeve of mine where you get the replay of the video, but not necessarily the assets that we used during it. But I do just want to note that if you are interested in learning more about GEO for coffee brands specifically, and how in particular you can guide that strategy, we are offering free 20-minute AI visibility audits, Julie and I, to prospects who are interested in improving their GEO and their presence on LLMs. But yeah, it's been a pleasure to have everybody here. I will pass back over to Julie just to tie things up and say goodbye as our host.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And we look forward to getting in touch with you in the very near future.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.